whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied
Young
up.
people who are just starting in this festival really want to do it, then embrace it with all your heart.
It's right here. Can you look at? Just take a peek. Do you remember doing this? I mean, this is iconic.
I remember doing it.
Wonderful director.
And when you say astringent, you mean like take some of the sweetness out
Yeah,
of it?
take some of the
Because
saccharine
there are
out.
Nazis in it, and that usually...
At 89, Julie Andrews is not just the graceful nanny who floated in on an umbrella or sang on a mountaintop. She is a woman with stories the world never expected to hear. For decades, her image was practically perfect in every way. But now, she is pulling back the curtain, revealing mischief hidden in Mary Poppins' prim coat, the truth about a love scene that left her literally weak at the knees, the chaos behind one of Hollywood's most magical moments, and the daring choice that shattered her wholesome image forever. These are not the polished tales the studios like to tell. They are the raw, surprising, and deeply human confessions of a legend who is finally ready to speak. For most of the world, Julie Andrews has always been the picture of poise, the practically perfect nanny who could charm children, clean a house, and save a family with a spoonful of sugar. But long before Mary Poppins ever opened her magic carpet bag, Julie was a little girl growing up in a world far less whimsical than the one she would one day create on screen. Born Julia Elizabeth Wells on October 1, 1935, in the small town of Walton-on-Thames, England, she was the child of two school teachers who lived modestly but carried their own ambitions. Her mother, Barbara, was a gifted pianist. Her father, Ted Wells, loved the theater, but that stability did not last. Her parents' marriage fell apart during World War II, and Barbara soon remarried, this time to a Canadian tenor named Ted Andrews, whose surname Julie would eventually take. He was not her biological father, but his influence on her early life, for better and for worse, would be impossible to ignore. From the moment her family realized Julie's natural singing voice stretched across a rare 4-octave range, her childhood stopped looking like most children's. While other kids played games after school, Julie was standing on a beer crate in smoky music halls so she could reach the microphone, performing alongside her mother and stepfather in vaudeville acts. She was just 9 years old when her voice became the family's main source of income. Audiences were amazed. Here was this tiny girl with a voice powerful enough to command a theater. But behind the curtain, her home life was deeply unsettled. Both her mother and stepfather drank heavily. And in her memoir, Julie revealed something far darker. On more than one occasion, Ted Andrews tried to enter her bedroom when he was drunk. She was just a child, and she had to put a lock on her door to protect herself. It was the kind of moment no child should ever face, and it forced her to grow up faster than anyone should have to. The shocks did not stop there. At 15, Julie learned that Ted Andrews was not her biological father after all. Her real father was a family friend her mother had been involved with during the war. It was a revelation that could have shattered her, but she kept going. Performing became not just a career but a shield, a way to stay focused when the rest of her life felt unstable. Her talent propelled her forward quickly. By age 12, she was performing for the royal family at the Royal Command Performance. By 13, she was starring on the West End in Starlight Roof. Every step was another leap away from her chaotic home life, but also another reminder that she was carrying the weight of an adult's responsibilities on very young shoulders. The work came with sacrifices. Julie did not have the luxury of a normal education or the easy social life of other teenagers. While her peers were navigating friendships, dances, and exams, she was mastering stage cues, perfecting her pitch, and traveling constantly for performances. But the discipline stuck with her, shaping the professionalism she would become known for decades later. By the mid-1950s, Julie Andrews had already built the kind of career most performers only dream about, but her biggest break was still waiting in the wings. In 1954, she crossed the Atlantic to star in The Boyfriend on Broadway, a move that would put her directly in front of the American theater world. 2 years later, she became a sensation playing Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. Night after night, she held audiences spellbound, transforming from a rough-voiced flower girl into a refined young woman with nothing more than her voice, presence, and extraordinary control. Critics raved, her fan base grew, and it seemed inevitable that when Hollywood adapted My Fair Lady into a movie, she would be their first choice. Except, she was not. When the film version was announced, the studio handed the role to Audrey Hepburn. For Julie, it was a professional blow, but fate had a twist ready. Walt Disney had seen her on stage and decided she was perfect for a new musical he was developing about a magical nanny. At first, Julie hesitated. She was pregnant with her first child and unsure about committing to a major film. Disney's response became legend. "That's all right, we'll wait." That kind of confidence in her was rare, and she accepted. When Mary Poppins hit theaters in 1964, it was not just a hit, it was a phenomenon. Julie's mix of discipline and warmth, sharp wit and kindness, turned the character into something unforgettable. The Academy Award for Best Actress followed, an almost unheard-of achievement for a first-time film actress. But what looked effortless on screen came from years of discipline forged in those early, difficult years. And she was not about to slow down. Just a year later, The Sound of Music brought her another iconic role, this time as Maria, the spirited governess in pre-war Austria. The film became a cultural landmark, one of the highest-grossing movies of all time, and cemented her as Hollywood's queen of wholesome charm. Yet for all the success, there was a growing awareness in Julie's mind. These roles were beautiful, but they also risked trapping her. Studios loved her as the perfect cheerful heroine, but she knew that if she did not take risks, she would be typecast for life. That tension between the image the world adored and the woman she truly was would shape some of her boldest choices in the years to come. And one of the first cracks in that perfect image would come in the form of an intimate scene that left her so shaken, her legs gave out the moment the camera stopped rolling. By 1964, Julie Andrews had already proven she could command a stage, steal a scene, and hold an audience's heart. But nothing had prepared her for what came next, a role that would push her far outside her comfort zone. That year, she was cast in the Americanization of Emily, a wartime romantic drama set in London during World War II, opposite Hollywood leading man James Garner. The film was witty, sharp, and a world away from the magical nanny and singing nun audiences associated with her. And for Julie, it came with a personal first, her very first on-screen love scene. On paper, it might have seemed like no big deal. After all, Julie was nearly 30, a professional performer since childhood, and well accustomed to cameras. But in her memoir, she admitted the truth. She was terrified. She did not know what was expected. She had little romantic experience in her real life, and the idea of showing that kind of intimacy on screen felt completely foreign. "I had no idea what one was supposed to do," she recalled years later, describing how even a simple kiss for the camera felt overwhelming. Garner, to his credit, handled the scene with complete professionalism. He was calm, easygoing, and never made her feel pressured. Julie later described him as delicious, not just for his charm, but for the kindness and reassurance he brought to a moment that could have easily gone wrong. Still, the emotional weight of it hit her harder than she expected. She threw herself into the scene, letting the chemistry and vulnerability carry her through. But when the director called cut and she stood up to walk away, her legs simply gave out. She had to steady herself, realizing she was not just acting. She had felt something new, something real in that moment. It was an awakening of sorts, both as a performer and as a woman. She could be sensual on screen without losing her dignity. She could take risks and still maintain control over how she was seen. It was a small but crucial step in breaking away from the polished, untouchable image Hollywood had wrapped her in. And as challenging as that scene had been, the real test of her grit and endurance was still ahead. High in the Austrian Alps, where she would be knocked flat again and again, this time not by emotion, but by the sheer force of a helicopter's spinning blades. If you have ever watched The Sound of Music, you know the opening shot. Julie Andrews spinning joyfully in an open meadow, the camera swooping in from above, her voice soaring against a backdrop of snow-capped peaks. It is one of the most famous images in film history, a scene so serene it feels like it was plucked straight from a dream. But the reality? It was pure chaos. In her memoir, Julie pulls back the curtain on that day in the Austrian Alps, and it is nothing like the peaceful moment audiences saw. The scene was filmed using a helicopter-mounted camera, still a relatively new technique in the 1960s. The chopper had to fly low to get the perfect shot, close enough that Julie could feel the vibrations in the ground before it even passed overhead. Every time it swooped in, the downdraft from the rotor blades slammed into her with such force that it knocked her flat on her back. One moment she would be twirling in character, arms stretched wide. The next she would be face down in wet grass, dress muddied, hair tangled, and grit stuck to her lips. It happened over and over again. She would haul herself up, dust off the costume, get back to her starting spot, and try again. By the 9th take, she was exhausted, cold, and aching from repeatedly hitting the ground. "I thought I would never get it right," she later admitted, and the cold did not help. The meadow might have looked sunlit and warm, but it was damp, windy, and high up in the mountains. As if that were not enough, there was the hair disaster. The studio wanted Maria's hair lighter, so they dyed Julie's natural brown locks. The first attempt, a disaster. It came out bright orange. They had to chop it short and dye it again, this time blonde, to fix the mess. That blonde bob became part of Maria's iconic look, but it was born out of pure necessity, not style. Still, despite the helicopter crashes, hair mishaps, and freezing weather, the final footage looked magical, proof that the audience only ever sees the polished surface, never the bruises it took to get there. But Julie was not always as polished off-screen as people imagined, and during the making of Mary Poppins, she would shock even Uncle Walt Disney himself with a moment so un-Mary Poppins-like it left the crew stunned. On screen, Julie Andrews' Mary Poppins was the picture of composure, not a hair out of place, not a word out of line. Off-screen, during filming in the early 1960s, she proved she could be anything but. One day on set, she was performing a wire stunt designed to make her float gracefully through the air. In the storyboards, it was supposed to look effortless. Mary Poppins gliding down, umbrella in hand, the magic of Disney in full swing. But when the rigging malfunctioned, reality hit literally. Julie came crashing down hard, landing in a heap instead of the gentle touchdown the crew had planned. The pain was sharp, the shock even sharper, and before she could stop herself, she let loose a string of curse words that would have made a sailor blush. Standing just a few feet away was none other than Walt Disney himself. Uncle Walt was known for his wholesome image, and Julie was convinced he had never heard anything like what had just come out of her mouth. But there was no taking it back. The words were already hanging in the air. She braced herself for a scolding, but Disney simply blinked, gave a half-smile, and moved on. And it was not the only time her behavior behind the scenes clashed with her squeaky clean image. Karen Dautrice, the young actress who played Jane Banks, remembered being on set one day when she spotted Julie still in full costume. Hat, gloves, Edwardian dress, standing off to the side between takes. To an 8-year-old, it was like seeing the real Mary Poppins in person, until Julie casually took a drag from a cigarette and tossed out another curse at the crew. For little Karen, it was one of the most shocking moments of her childhood. It was a reminder that the Julie Andrews the public thought they knew and the real Julie were two very different women, and just 2 decades later, she would shatter that wholesome image completely. Not with a slip of the tongue, but with a bold on-screen choice that had fans around the world gasping. By the early 1980s, Julie Andrews had been Hollywood's queen of wholesome for nearly 2 decades. She was the magical nanny who floated in on an umbrella, the governess who sang through the Alps, a living embodiment of grace and good manners. But in 1981, she did something so unexpected that it sent shockwaves through her fan base and the entertainment industry alike. That year, she starred in S.O.B., a dark comedy directed by her husband, Blake Edwards. On the surface, it was a satirical jab at Hollywood's obsession with sex, fame, and reinvention. But for Julie, it became a personal turning point, because in one unforgettable scene, she bared her chest on camera for the very first time. It was not a gimmick or a cheap stunt. Julie had spent years quietly chafing against the roles the studios wanted her to play. Sweet, polite, morally spotless characters that felt increasingly narrow. She wanted to prove she could take risks, break molds, and surprise people. And what better way to do it than in a scene that both poked fun at and subverted Hollywood's obsession with female purity? The public reaction was immediate and intense. Some fans were outraged, accusing her of ruining her image. Others applauded her boldness, seeing it as a declaration that she was more than just the sum of her family-friendly roles. Julie did not shy away from the controversy. With her trademark wit, she famously quipped, "Does Mary Poppins have an orgasm? Of course she does." It was a line that summed up exactly what she was doing, reminding the world that actresses are human beings with depth, desires, and agency, not just the characters they play. Blake Edwards had deliberately cast her in the role to challenge the public's perception of her, and she trusted him completely. They approached the scene with care, ensuring it served the story rather than existing purely for shock value. In the end, it worked. SOB did not just reveal more of Julie physically, it revealed her willingness to take control of her career and image. She was no longer just practically perfect. She was unpredictable, daring, and unafraid to upset expectations. And as bold as that move was, her personal life during those years was equally intense, because behind closed doors, Julie was navigating a marriage filled with love, loyalty, and the kind of challenges that would test any relationship. When Julie Andrews married Blake Edwards in 1969, she knew she was signing on for a partnership with one of Hollywood's most talented and most complex directors. Blake was sharp, charming, and endlessly creative, but he also carried a shadow side: chronic health issues, unpredictable moods, and a restlessness that could make life together anything but calm. Their relationship began with an almost cinematic twist. They first crossed paths when their cars pulled into the same therapist's driveway. At first, Julie tried to keep her distance. She sensed the emotional weight Blake carried and was not sure she wanted to take it on. But the more they talked, the more she saw someone she could connect with on a level few others understood. They married after 2 years of dating, and from the start, their life together was a mix of professional collaboration and personal devotion. Blake directed several of her films, including SOB and Victor Victoria, and they often fed off each other's creative energy. But behind the success, there was constant worry. Blake suffered from a list of medical problems: gallbladder issues, chest pains, recurring infections, and a long battle with depression. Julie often stepped into the role of caretaker, juggling her career while making sure he got the treatments he needed. It was exhausting, but she rarely complained. "We leaned on each other," she would later say, crediting their shared humor for getting them through some of the darkest days. Their family life was unconventional but full. Julie brought her daughter Emma from her first marriage. Blake had 2 children from his, and together they adopted 2 Vietnamese girls, Amy and Joanna, after the Vietnam War. Their home was a blend of cultures, personalities, and constant movement, and Julie embraced it, even when her schedule left little room to breathe. But as the years went on, Blake's health declined further. The man who had once been larger than life was growing weaker, and by 2010, complications from pneumonia took him from her. Julie has said that losing Blake felt like losing a part of herself. For over 40 years he had been her partner in every sense: in love, in art, in raising their family. In interviews, she has admitted there are still moments when she feels a little lost without him. Yet even in grief she kept moving forward, pouring her energy into writing, voice acting, and advocacy for children's rights. The woman the world saw as practically perfect had faced heartbreak, loss, and reinvention more than once, and with each challenge, she proved that her real story was far more complex and far more inspiring than the fairy tales she brought to life on screen. Julie Andrews' career has spanned more than 7 decades, crossing from the West End to Broadway, from Disney musicals to daring comedies, and from singing on a beer crate as a child to voicing animated queens for a new generation. Along the way, she has endured personal trauma, fought to reinvent herself, and refused to let Hollywood dictate who she should be. To many, she will always be Mary Poppins, or Maria, the smiling, graceful figure who could solve any problem with a song. But the truth is far richer and far more human. She was a child who learned to survive long before she learned to act, a performer who lost the voice that built her career but found new ways to connect, a woman who could make Walt Disney blush, bare her soul and more on screen, and still keep her dignity intact. Her newest revelations, the cheeky humor, the behind-the-scenes chaos, the private battles with love and loss, show that Julie Andrews is not just a symbol of Hollywood's golden age, she is a survivor of it. She is proof that even the most polished icons are layered with stories the public never sees, and that reinvention is possible at any age.